Thank you again for joining us. This is number 6 of our summer 6-pack series. So our last one. If you have questions during the meeting, there's a Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen. Please use that to ask questions. We will attempt to answer those questions during the meeting here, but if we run out of time or if you stump the expert, then we'll get back to you with an answer when we email out a copy of the PowerPoint presentation to you. Keep in mind, at the end of the session, we're going to do a drawing for a 6-pack of your choice, whoever the lucky winner is, and we will get that delivered to you. So we'll have a random drawing for that at the end. So our subject matter expert today is Steve Holsclaw of Eastern Alliance Insurance Company. Thank you, Steve, for joining us on this. Steve has over 34 years of experience in the insurance industry, and he's a work comp expert. He's going to talk to us today about work comp and COVID-19. In addition to his expertise on insurance, Steve is a state champion softball coach in Indiana. So, Steve, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tom. It's my pleasure. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here in the Nolte Insurance Summer 6-Pack Extravaganza. I've heard it's going viral. Today's topic has impacted all aspects of our lives and the economy. And I suspect in the years to come, we'll be like our grandparents or our great-grandparents talking to our grandkids or great-grandkids about the great pandemic of 2020 and telling them how easy they have it nowadays. Kind of like your dad or your grandpa tells you now that, you know, I walked to school uphill, 3 foot of snow, both ways. You know, I don't know how many times I've heard that. But anyway, I am excited. I think it's obviously something that has impacted everybody and all lines of business as well. So as I was preparing this and I was going through setting up the slides, I found this one here with the compass and the telescope. And I thought it was pretty appropriate for the time that we're in right now. Things have changed. We've had to go different directions in our business and how we go about our daily lives. And sometimes you need that compass to stay focused on your true north and the direction that you want to go. The telescope is to look to the future and have a vision for how things may be. Far off in the distance, what is your goal? And with the telescope, you can stay focused on that, because clearly this pandemic has changed the way we do things and on a daily basis, and perhaps even our futures as well. So with that, here are the things, the topics I want to talk about. These are mostly from, as what I would call, frequently asked questions. Special coverage requirements. Do you need something special on your workers' compensation policy to provide coverage for this pandemic and your employees under the Workers' Compensation Act? What's the employer's responsibility? The claim process. What do the claim reps go through, and you as well, once a claim is reported? And then how do we come to a compensability decision? And finally, just a little bit on the impact that this pandemic has had on industry, and always asking pricing. And I'll give you what I know. I'm not an expert in pricing work comp policies, but I'll tell you what I do know. Probably just enough to be dangerous, but at least to leave you something to think about. So, but before we get started, I want you to remember this number and jot it down: 3500. And jot down what you think this number represents. 3500. So our first topic, special coverage. Under the Michigan statute of workers' compensation, as well as most jurisdictions around the United States, this type of exposure or illness is generally not covered under work comp. Workers' compensation is not written to cover what's called general diseases of life, such as a cold or the flu. And you got to remember, this is a flu, this is a virus. Catching a cold or catching a normal flu from your co-employee on the job is not a covered workers' compensation claim. However, because of the enormity of this COVID-19 coronavirus, the rules have changed. And then an executive order was issued by the governor of Michigan, and I will say by most other governors in other states as well. Michigan is not unique to this. And basically saying that, and they've whittled it down, as you can see, that the emergency rules define a first responder employee quite broadly. And this focuses on healthcare workers, employees in the healthcare industries, hospitals, doctor's office, physical therapy, nursing homes, those that treat mental illness, that they are also identified as first response employees. And the reason for that is that their employment places them at a greater danger than the general public. So if you think about an emergency room physician, intake, nurse, someone comes in and says, I think I have COVID, I feel terrible, I've had this symptom, that symptom, and they test them and they come back positive for COVID, they're going to see that more than once a day, whereas the general public is not. And so that elevates the reason for compensability in their situation. Also along those lines, first responders are what we originally think of as true first responders: the police, fire, EMTs, volunteer and defense workers. This order of March 30th, which incidentally is the fourth order with respect to workers' compensation that the governor has issued, this one kind of expands the definition of a first responder, and it reaches out to the state correctional and local correctional officers as well. And I think most other jurisdictions are doing this. The second part of the order, which is kind of the meat of it with regard to whether an exposure is compensable, and I've highlighted a couple of them, a couple of lines that are significant. For the purpose of the WDCA, which is the Michigan Workers' Compensation Board, subject to rebuttal by specific facts contrary, a COVID-19 response employee who is confirmed as COVID-19 positive on or after March 18, 2020, either by a physician or by test, shall be presumed to have suffered a personal injury as that term is defined by Section 104.2b. Section 104.2b basically says that if you are injured in this course and scope of your employment, then your claim becomes compensable. The two areas I highlighted were not in the executive order. Actually, it was not in executive orders 1 and 2. There was no way to rebut, regardless of the facts that were gathered, that this was the exposure occurred while in the course and scope of their employment, which means that if it was, for instance, if it was a nurse who works in the pediatric ward of the hospital, came down with COVID-19, and no one in that department had tested positive for COVID, none of the patients or the parents, it was still presumed that it was contracted at the place of employment, and the claim would be deemed compensable. Now there's some leeway on that where you can investigate and determine whether or not the exposure did in fact occur on the job in the course and scope of their employment. The second part that I've highlighted, which indicates that confirmed COVID-19 positive either by a physician or by test, has always been in there, but before it did not have to be confirmed by a physician or by a test. If, for instance, if they just thought they had the symptoms of COVID-19, they were feeling bad, and they were sent home, that could be, that at that time was accepted as a workers' compensation claim because it was presumed that they had COVID-19 if they complained of similar symptoms. So that has changed to where now they actually have to be diagnosed either by a physician or via the test. So it's come a long way. This is starting to be a little more like what we deal with on an everyday basis with regard to compensability under the Michigan Work Compact, and in all honesty, most other jurisdictions as well. So the employer's responsibility, it's the same as all incidents reported to you by your employee that they were either injured or exposed to something on the job. Ensure their safety and the need for medical attention. Complete the Michigan 100, Form 100, which is the FROI's first report of injury in our world, and send it to your carrier. We'll take it from there. Let the carrier do the due diligence and the investigation, and you can maintain that relationship with your employee regardless of how this thing turns out. The process, in my opinion, these claims are a little better suited for more experienced claim representatives to investigate and manage. They take a lot of time. There are a lot of questions to ask. We want to verify and document the exposure, and like we said, I've always said if it's compensable, we'll get them the benefits to the letter of the law. But after my 30 some odd years in this, not everybody is as detailed as what we are. Let's put it that way. So, and just like any other claim, the claim rep will talk to the employer to verify the information on the first report of injury. We want to interview the employer and or their supervisor, the employee's supervisor, who I feel is a person that's in a better position to give facts. Generally, their supervisor sees them on a daily basis. As a matter of fact, they may have even reported the claim or their exposure to the supervisor. And that's who we really want to talk to out of the gate. And of course, we will interview the employee. Some of the key questions asked of the employee and the employee and the employer during the investigation is, what's their job duty? What are their normal duties? And we understand that at times they're doing something that may not be, that fall within that, word for word description of their job because they were asked to do something by their supervisor that may be a little bit outside. Well, that now all of a sudden that falls in their job description. But, you'd be amazed at the difference in perception of job description between the employee and the employer. And so that's why we ask them both and make sure that everybody's on the same page. We ask what dates they work during the time that they felt they were exposed. They may have only worked 3 days and they said they were exposed on the 4th day. Or all 3 days they were working with COVID positive patients or employees. How were they exposed? What were they doing? Is the person that transferred the virus to them, or that they suspect transferred the virus to them, have they been confirmed positive for COVID-19? And now we know that with HIPAA, that if it's a patient or someone outside of the employee staff, we're not going to get the name, and that's okay. But most employers know whether this employee is treating a COVID positive patient or the co-employee that they're interacting with turns out to be positive. And to be honest with you, if it's a co-employee, if we don't already have the claim, we're going to get the claim that they were positive as well. So we just need confirmation that there was in fact an exposure of COVID-19 out there. What are the symptoms? What symptoms did they have? Believe it or not, the majority of the symptoms are very consistent. Headaches, fever, feeling like the worst flu you've ever had, loss of taste and loss of smell, which is kind of a new one for us that we've seen here. But everyone has indicated there's been at least some period of time loss of smell and loss of taste. And then, of course, hard to breathe. Felt like, the chest was real tight. They just couldn't quite catch their breath. Obviously, those are a little more important, and we certainly hope that they have sought treatment at the hospital for those types of symptoms there. And when do these symptoms begin? COVID-19, the life is no more than 14 days, and they usually, what I'm reading is they usually come on at about 5 days after exposure, anywhere from 3 to 5 days. So we use that as a gauge. It's not the tell-all, but we use it as a gauge to determine the exposure. And then you kind of work backwards as to who they were working with at the time. And have they been tested? They've been tested or diagnosed by a physician. And once all those fall into line, then we essentially have a compensable claim. And this is mostly what we're dealing with is the medical facilities, long-term care, living facilities, the residents there are not, or let's say they are, the comorbidities, they're higher risk at contracting COVID-19. And so those are where we're seeing the majority of the claims come through. The first 3 claims we received here at Eastern involved 3 police officers who, the first report came in, they were all on separate runs. They were arresting 3 different suspects, and every one of them reported the claim because when they went to arrest that suspect, they told them they were positive for COVID-19. I have the coronavirus. So when we interviewed the police officers, we asked each one of them, was it confirmed that they had, how did you know they had COVID-19? He said, because they told me. How did they know they had it? He said, I don't know. Were they tested? Yes. Did they have COVID-19, the coronavirus? No. He said, they were telling us that, thinking that we would not arrest them. So that was their excuse or their ploy to avoid going to the Hokie that day. So Compensability. As I said, the employee must be in the course and scope of their employment and at a higher risk in the general public. Like I said, healthcare workers, first responders. Some jurisdictions have expanded the definition of first responders to grocery store employees and food bank employees, which, boy, back in March and April, absolutely, because as you know, the shelves were empty and people were stocking them. And while they were stocking them, as soon as they put them up there, it'd be taken off the shelf. So I understand that that type of mentality there on increasing the amount of presumptive essential workers type thing. One thing we ask about is any employment, a second job per se, that they may have had exposure. Because like I said earlier, the one that a few of them were no one in their department or even at the employer had tested positive for COVID. No one else was complaining of symptoms. So why does this employee have symptoms? And what we found out is there's second jobs out there that they're working. And that is where we've had one where a particular employee was also a bartender at a private bar that remained open after the shutdown of bars and restaurants and stuff. So we actually tracked that back down to the exposure occurred there versus the employer for whom we insured at the time. Again, the presumptive jurisdictions is if there is no evidence that exposure occurred outside of their employment, they're presumed to have been exposed within the course and scope of their employment, and we manage those claims. One question that came up, and I mentioned it earlier, alluded to it earlier, was, is there coverage for an employee that is asymptomatic but required to quarantine? Back when this first started, they were covered, but now they have to be diagnosed by a physician or in fact tested positive for COVID-19. We understand that, but sending employees home because they feel bad or you suspect it, but technically they have to be diagnosed by a physician or have the test. The question was, what's the percentage of claims that are COVID-19 claims are denied? I have not seen stats on this, and I'll be perfectly honest with you, it's not something I track. I learned, let's see, I've been in this 34 years, so about 32 years I learned not to track your numbers of denials or claims deemed compensable. Because should you ever be deposed, specifically in bad faith allegations, it's going to be a long day if you know these numbers. And rightfully so. And I'm not sure that there's really many carriers that actually track this, and they're certainly not going to make it public, I wouldn't think, but that's just my opinion. But what I can tell you is that healthcare businesses may have a higher rate of covered COVID claims than, say, manufacturing businesses or trucking businesses. It's just, the type of business and the job that the employee has is going to lead to the compensability or the denial based on the investigation. Boy, the industry. What I'm reading is there's going to be less brick and mortar because a lot of people are working remotely now. And then once they come back, there may be less square footage of that brick and mortar building that you want to have that's in your market. And I believe employers are learning that their employees can work remotely and still be productive, hit their goals, and still interact. And I think it's quite a surprise. I think this is the one thing that this has this, all the restrictions and the closings and the rules to be safe has caused business to change, obviously. But a wise man told me a long time ago that necessity is the mother of invention. And when you find yourself in a situation where I have to keep going, I have to keep my doors open, I have to help people, then you find a way. And you invent ways to do things. And I think that's where we're headed here, if we're not already there in a lot of instances. There may be fewer, they may decide there's fewer employees to do the job, maybe the case. Less travel for meetings. I think that's going to be more so inter-office, inter-business. I think, this is just my opinion, customer face-to-face is nothing better. But I think for a lot of businesses, they're going to look at, do we need to fly everybody in for this meeting? Or do we need to travel to an off-site spot? It's going to happen. I just think it's going to be less than what it used to be because of these great technology advances of Zoom and Microsoft Teams and those type of things. Like today, great opportunity to get information and to exude information, even though we can't be in the same room together. So it's a great. I think it's going to be here to stay, but the face-to-face is still going to be the key, especially for customers. Somebody asked about what's this going to do about the work comp premium. That's not my area of expertise, but what I can tell you is comp premium is based on how many people are employed. So I'm going to refer you to your agent with this question for more specifics as it may apply to your business and how you go about doing things with your employees and so on. So, but what I can tell you is new injury claims. I guess this would move to the mod. New injury claims excluding COVID-19 claims. And that by that I mean the slip and fall, the being hit by a piece of machinery or getting your hand cut while you're working with metal. Those types of claims are down 25 to 50% since March. But of course, one of the big factors that is there's not many people working anymore, not as many. So that's going to come back. I trust that it will come back, and I would like to say that as you start to ramp back up, as things open up and you start to reopen your business and start to go to the full production, remember that some of your employees haven't worked for a while, so be sure to reinforce your safety protocols, reinforce in all likelihood you're going to have to do the social distancing and those kind of things as well. But just go back to that mentality that you had before this all went crazy, that everybody wants an employee to leave at the end of the day with the same body parts they came in with. So really focus on that because everyone's going to be fired up to get back to work and get the job done. I believe that. Kind of like parents with college students or high school students, please go back to school. They're going to be fired up to get them back, and everyone's going to be excited. But in the industry, let's make sure that we stay focused on the safety aspect of it. So here it is, 3500. And I will say this, I don't believe I really covered anything. You might be able to extract something from my presentation that might lead you to this number. So I trust everyone has written it down and written down their thought as to what this may be. So without further ado, and a virtual drum roll, $3,500, the average cost of a COVID-19 claim countrywide. Realize that the medical on this, almost all the testing is free. There are some, emergency room treatments that's going to run this, that's going to get you up to this number. Indemnity-wise, lost wage benefits, the quarantine's 14 days. There are some that extend beyond that because they just can't shake it. The COVID-19 symptoms kind of last a little, not always over at 14 days. They may last a little bit longer. So obviously you have to be cleared with no fever and the symptoms before you come back to work. So it may extend to 3, 4, maybe even 5 weeks. But usually about 2 to 3 weeks is all we're seeing on lost wage benefits for COVID-19. So I'm sure that was quite the surprise. I'm not sure if anybody guessed that, but it caught me by surprise since I see so many claims. And yes, there are those large ones that are unfortunate, but for the most part, they're all right around this $3,500 neighborhood. So I want to thank you for your patience and listening, and I'll do my best to answer any questions you may have.
Steve, thank you so much for presenting. Because we did design this one for a half an hour and we're at our time limit, I think we're going to follow up with the answers in our email when we send out the PowerPoint. So we will answer all the questions. We have several of them that came in. So we're going to follow up and do it that way. Okay. Meanwhile, for our summer 6-pack, can you pick a lucky number between 1 and 100 for us?
Let's go with 27.
27 is the number. Adam, can you tell me who was the winner? I don't have the list, so I can't tell you.
Right, looks like Fleetstra.
Julie Fleetstra is the winner. Julie, we will get a hold of you and make sure you get the 6-pack of your choice. So we'll be in touch shortly on that. Everybody else, thank you again for joining us in the last of our series. Steve, thank you so much for leading and giving us all this good information. We will send out the PowerPoint and we will answer all the questions when we send those out. So thanks again. Have a great day. See you. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.